What's up guys, Lifting here. With the patch 1.3 release, I am updating another build guide here, and this time we're talking about the Flame Totem Blood Magic mainly Marauder build guide, which is one of my favorite builds that I've ever played. Because of the Templar and Marauder skill tree rework, this build has been greatly buffed, at least in terms of damage output. We have less block chains and a little less total life, however the buff to our damage and armor easily makes up for this. For this kind of build, I definitely prefer the new skill tree. If you guys have been tinkering with the idea of trying out a totem build, then this is definitely the time. And I should say so you guys don't waste your time, that if you have already seen my previous 1.2 video for the Flame Totem Manly Marauder build, I would suggest that you simply skip to the skill tree progression part in this video, as nothing else besides that has changed too much. If not, then I would suggest you watch the entire video to get a better understanding of the build and how it works. Let's get into it. I'm going to show you one of my absolute favorite Marauder builds that can be used by both beginners and veterans to the game. It is the double Flame Totem Blood Magic Marauder build. And this build is suited for both softcore and hardcore play. I personally played this on hardcore and I managed to stay alive while having a great clear speed in maps and endgame content. This build is incredibly strong compared to the currency you have to invest into it. Flame Totem is one of those skills that scales really well with just more levels, and it only requires 3 support gems to become very strong. Later on, if you have the currency, you can greatly increase the power of the build by getting yourself a 5 or 6 linked chest and adding in 2 additional support skill gems. The amount of currency needed to reach endgame of course varies on how lucky you are with the gear you find on the way, but in general you can make the build endgame viable for about 20 to 30 chaos orbs, which, as you might know, is very cheap and very manageable if you make good use of the chaos orb recipe. So let me give you a little introduction to the build. The defensive powers of this character lies in having a ton of life, armor, a good amount of block chains and lots of life regeneration. Additionally, we are using an Immortal Call cast when damage taken skill gem setup, and I will show you that later. For this build we're also using a Granite Flask to further boost our armor count to make us even tankier. This build uses the Blood Magic Keystone, which means that instead of mana we will be fueling our skill costs through our life pool instead. The benefit of using Blood Magic is that it allows you to focus on what's really important for this build: life and damage. The great amount of HP, block chains, armor and the Granite Flask is going to make us very tanky. And since we're using totems, reflect damage is never a problem, which of course is nice not having to worry about. Totems will, however, reflect elemental damage back onto themselves, but that's easily countered by just summoning a new totem. The offensive powers and main damage of this build lies in the use of Flame Totem, obviously. To make our totems deal more damage, we're also using the Curse Flammability to lower our enemies' resistances to fire, which, to put it simply, results in us dealing more damage. For this build we're also picking up the Keynote Ancestral Bond. This keynote allows us to have 2 totems up at a time, but in turn it also prevents us from using any attacks or casting spells. If you want, you can still use traps or mines, however it is not something that I did with this build, as it really isn't necessary. The damage from the totems is more than enough. Ancestral Bond basically doubles our damage output, and we now not only have 1 powerful flame totem, we have 2. Trust me, it's all worth it. Okay, so let me show you the skill gem setup we use for this character. For direct damage we are using Flame Totem, linked with faster casting, fire penetration, added chaos damage and greater multiple projectiles. Faster casting, fire penetration and added chaos damage all directly or indirectly increases the totem's damage. Greater multiple projectiles will make the totem cast 5 fire beams instead of 1. All of these beams will deal the amount of damage you see on the tooltip right here, and it does that each second. Added up, that is 6,827 damage per second, but don't forget that we're using Ancestral Bond and we can summon an additional totem. This basically means that you can double the amount of damage, which leaves us with 13,654 damage per second. And remember, this character is only level 73. If you were to complete the build, and I will show you how to do that, you would end up with a lot more damage. If you eventually get yourself a 6-link chest, I would recommend adding the faster projectiles skill gem as well. Not only will it increase your damage, it will also greatly increase the range of the fire beams our totems are shooting. If you want something different though, then the knockback skill gem can be quite funny to use as well, but that's up to you. If you only have a 4-link chest armor, then I recommend taking out the added chaos damage and only using greater multiple projectiles, faster casting and fire penetration with Flame Totem. Our flammability curse is linked with increased duration and faster casting. Faster casting and increased duration are not necessary, but they are both like a quality of life improvement for the build. And you could, instead of faster casting, choose to use the increased area of effect skill gem instead if you prefer. To improve the defenses of this character, we are using cast when damage taken linked with Enduring Cry, Immortal Call and increased duration. Cast when damage taken needs to be leveled to level 9, Enduring Cry level 10, Immortal Call level 9 and increased duration level 20. But as you can see, I haven't gotten to that yet myself. Besides this skill gem setup, we are actually also using another cast when damage taken skill gem setup for our build. And this works a little different. Here we are using cast when damage taken linked with Summon Skeletons, Molten Shell and Enfeeble. In this case, cast when damage taken needs to be leveled to level 9, Summon Skeletons until level 12, Molten Shell level 12 and Enfeeble level 10. These two cast when damage taken skill gem setups works in two different ways. The one with Immortal Call linked to it works by saving us from those really heavy hitting attacks that would normally either kill or bring us down to really low HP. When that happens, Immortal Call will proc and make us immune to physical damage for a few seconds, depending on the level of your increased duration skill gem. In that time we can easily heal up and move to a safer area and kill the mofo that thought he was allowed to hit us for that much damage. The other cast when damage taken skill gem setup does not block or make us immune like Immortal Call. It does, however, greatly reduce the amount of incoming damage we're going to take for about 10 seconds after it procs. It does this in 3 ways. 1, by increasing our armor by a small amount with Molten Shell. 2, by casting Enfeeble onto nearby enemies and thus reducing the amount of damage, both physical, elemental and chaos damage they deal. And 3, by summoning a few skeletons as decoys. The summon skeletons is a little gimmicky, but when you play around with it, it actually makes a difference that is worth considering. If you prefer, you can instead use Frost Wall, which will make projectiles unable to hit you if the wall blocks from the right direction, or you can choose whatever other skill gem you prefer. It is entirely up to you if you want to implement the last cast when damage taking skill gem setup, but I feel like it makes a great difference, at least until you get some awesome gear with lots of armor. At that time you may want to consider switching to something else. I should note here that if you're farming content below Merciless Piety level, then it is probably a good idea to keep your cast when damage taking skill gem setups at a lower level so that they will proc more often. But that is something you'll have to judge for yourself when playing. For extra mobility, we're using Lightning Warp linked with faster casting and reduced duration. Faster casting and reduced duration will basically just allow us to cast Lightning Warp a lot faster. It is a pretty common skill gem setup, and if you guys have seen my other build guide videos, you will have noticed that I use this skill gem in lots of situations for lots of builds, and this is not the exception. Alright guys, so let's head over to the skill tree, and here I'm gonna show you how I would suggest you level up your dual Flame Totem Manly Marauder. Let's quickly summarize what it is that we're actually looking for here in the skill tree before I start to show you how to level this character. First of all, the 3 main defensive properties that we're looking for is life, armor and chains to block. For offensive capabilities we want totem damage, elemental damage, fire damage and spell damage. All of these benefit our Flame Totems. One thing to keep in mind guys is that with the new skill tree we're not going to be able to pick up Ancestral Bond straight from level 31 when we can get our Flame Totem quest reward. Instead, with the new skill tree that I'm going to show you, we're picking up Ancestral Bond at around level 38 or 39. And before you pick up Ancestral Bond, I would suggest that you level up using Molten Strike with the 2-handed melee physical weapon. And when you get to level 24, start using Searing Bond. At level 31 you're then going to get your Flame Totem, and at around level 38 or 39 you'll be able to pick up Ancestral Bond and you can use dual Flame Totems. And that's where the fun begins. So first of all, we're gonna start out by picking this Life and Armor node. Then we're gonna head in this direction, pick up Life and Armor here instead of Life Regeneration. And then head into Warrior's Blood for the increased maximum life, life regeneration, and 20+ to strength. Then after that, we're gonna pick up Heart of the Warrior. We're starting out really solid here with 2 really sweet life notables. Then after that, we're gonna head in this direction where we're gonna pick up Solidity for the additional chance to block, increased melee physical damage while holding a shield, and increased defenses from equipped shield. We don't care too much about increased melee physical damages while holding a shield, obviously. However, you may want to consider leveling with the shield and a one-hander. If you do that, you will of course benefit from this. But other than that, we're just interested in the additional chance to block and the increased defenses from equipped shield. Also, I would suggest that you pick up Diamond Skin while you're leveling and then speccing out of it as you move into the late game and you get good enough gear to cover your resistances. After that, we're gonna head in this direction where we're gonna pick up Juggernaut for the 16% increased armor, 6% increased life, and 20% increased life recovery from flasks. Very nice. We're then gonna head down in this direction where we're gonna pick up Blood Magic. Now, throw away your mana potions, you don't need them anymore. And that, in my opinion, makes leveling so much easier as well. Remember, when you pick up Blood Magic, you will instead of mana, use your life as a resource. So every time you use an attack that before would cost 7 mana, it now costs 7 life. When you've picked up Blood Magic, we're gonna head back up in this direction where we're gonna pick up these skill nodes. We're gonna use some travel nodes here to get up till Sanctity. Sanctity provides 20% increased armor, increased maximum energy shield, life regeneration, and strength and intelligence. If you at this point in time feel like you need dexterity to level up some of your gems, or to equip some gear, then pick up expertise. This is one of the notables that I would suggest that you try to spec out of late game when you have sufficient gear that can cover your stat requirements. When you've picked up Sanctity, we're gonna pick up Discipline and Training for a nice flat 30+ to maximum life and 10% increased maximum life. And then we're gonna head in this direction, pick the upper elemental damage node here, and then pick Elementalist. Elementalist provides 12+ to elemental resistances, 10% increased elemental damage, and 5% chance to freeze, shock, and ignite. While this is not an ignite build, that chance to ignite is actually going to benefit our totem build, and I'm going to explain to you why in just a few moments. When you've picked up Elementalist, we're going to pick up Devotion for the increased maximum life, increased buffs on you, and 20+ to strength. After that, we're going to head in this direction, and we're finally going to pick up Ancestral Bond. With Ancestral Bond, you can now summon 2 totems. And if you follow my guidelines here, you'll be able to pick that up around level 38 or 39. At this point in time, your flame totems will be a great upgrade towards your damage and clear speed. Also, I would suggest that instead of picking up increased casting speed for summoning totems, that you pick up increased totem damage. And while increased casting speed for summoning totems is good, we're gonna get a notable that covers this much better, so we might as well just pick up the increased totem damage. Now to buff our totems, we're gonna head down towards the bottom of the tree again, where we're gonna pick up Ironwood. We're gonna go in this direction where we pick up totem cast and placement speed, and Ironwood provides 12% increased totem damage, totem gain 15 to all elemental resistances, and totems have 10% additional physical damage reduction. This is a very strong notable. It significantly buffs our totems. To make our totems even stronger, we're gonna head back up here where we're gonna pick up increased totem damage, physical damage reduction, elemental resistances, and totemic mastery. And once again, guys, I would suggest that you go in this direction. Don't pick up these 8% increased totem damage nodes because they are much more efficient skill nodes throughout the tree that will buff our totem damage. So instead we're going to pick up the physical damage reduction and elemental damage reduction here. Totemic Mastery will increase our totem's damage by 14% and give it a nice 25% increased totem life. When you've picked up Totemic Mastery, we're going to pick up some more life by going in this direction and picking up Constitution for that 20+ flat maximum life and that really nice 14% increased maximum life as well. Then we're gonna go in this direction, pick up Sentinel for the increased evasion rating and armor, and 10 to all elemental resistances. After that, we're gonna head in this direction, where I'm first of all gonna mention this skill node here, 25 increased totem life. That is really good for a single skill node. and it also provides some increased totem duration. That is not too important though, but that 25% increased totem life, very nice. After that, totem attack and cast speed, and remember that cast speed influences our flame totem's damage by a lot, so cast speed is always good to have. It's not only going to summon the totems faster, but it's going to increase the damage of the totems as well. And then finally we're going to pick up Totem Exile, and this was the notable that I was talking about just before. This will give us 30% increased casting speed for summoning totems. You don't have to pick this up if you don't want to, but 30% increased casting speed for summoning your totems is a great quality of life improvement. And the reason that it's nice to have fast summoning speed for your totems is that in certain fights, monsters will be able to kill your totems before they can deal damage if they aren't summoned fast enough. So the faster you're able to summon your totems, the more damage you can get off before they actually die. When you've picked up Totem Exile, I would suggest you head down in this direction, pick up these life and flask notes here, along with the notable profane chemistry for the 6% increased maximum life and 30% increased life recovery from flasks. This is a very efficient and good cluster. After that, we're going to pick up the neighboring shield cluster here, along with the notable Command of Steel. Command of Steel, along with shield defenses, will give us 110% increased defenses from equipped shield and some additional block chains from these notables. Very nice. Now let's add some elemental damage to our totems. We're gonna do that by first of all picking up Arsonist. 25% increased fire damage and 1% of life regenerated per second. When we have picked up Arsonist, I would suggest you pick up Barbarism as well. Barbarism will provide 6% increased maximum life, and most importantly, that 1+2 maximum fire resistances, along with 8+2 additional fire resistances. So very nice. This cluster was recently buffed and it is so good right now. After we have picked up Barbarism, we're gonna head back towards the Templar area and head into the Illuminati Triangle. We're gonna pick up this single elemental damage skill node here, and then instead of picking up these inefficient elemental damage skill nodes, we're gonna pick up fire damage, and then Celestial Judgment for that 20% increased elemental damage and 2% fire resistance damage penetration. After that, we're gonna pick up this pathway elemental node and then pick up Celestial Punishment. Celestial Punishment is going to grant you 5% chance to freeze, shock and ignite, but most importantly, because your totems attack so rapidly and because of Elementalist and Celestial Judgment, you're gonna ignite your enemies fairly often, and that means that you'll deal these 30% increased damage against ignited enemies. Very powerful. After we have picked up Celestial Punishment, I would suggest you pick up this cast speed node here, along with Light of Divinity for 15% increased spell damage and even more cast speed. When you've done that, we're gonna head in this direction where we're gonna pick up Retribution for the spell damage and cast speed increase. And then we're gonna head towards this direction where we're gonna pick up Shamanistic Fury along with the totem attack and cast speed. Shamanistic Fury will provide you with 16% increased totem damage. And once again, the 8% increased totem damage skill node is not efficient, so we're gonna leave that. When you've picked up Shamanistic Fury, I would suggest you head into this direction. And once again, if you need dexterity, you can pick up this agility node, but spec out of it when you can, when you get good enough gear that will cover your stat requirements. And then head over in this direction where we're gonna pick up Cruel Preparation for the 10% increased maximum life and 5 to all elemental resistances. And then we're gonna head into this direction where we're gonna pick up these fire damage skill nodes along with Heart of Flame that provides us that nice 25% increased fire damage, and even better, that 3% fire damage resistance penetration. These fire nodes in total will grant you a 91% increased fire damage with your totems. Very nice. And when you have picked up Heart of Flame, the build is actually finished at around these 106 skill points. But if you want to pump up the damage even more, I would suggest that you head down in this direction when you pick up these two elemental nodes along with Firewalker for the 18% increased fire damage, and then head down into Elemental Dominion for the increased cast speed, spell damage, and the intelligence. At this point in time, I would not suggest picking up more offensive capabilities, but if you want to add some more points to become more tanky, I would suggest that you pick up these flask nodes here. Alchemist is very powerful. Along with the Granite Flask, you can gain 40 to 50% increased physical damage reduction. These flask nodes are not to be underestimated. And that's it for the skill tree, guys. Now let's head over and talk about gearing and stat priorities. Let's quickly summarize what this build needs to function. We of course want life and resistances so that we don't die. That is pretty self-explanatory. And to further improve our survivability, we want as much armor and block chains on our gear as possible. And to make sure that Our flame will burn the brightest and deal the most damage. We want fire, spell, or elemental damage on our gear. You probably already know this, but it is very important that you realize that being resistance capped when starting out in merciless difficulty is mandatory. If you aren't by this time, you need to do what you can to get there, or at least get as close as possible, especially if playing on hardcore. Don't want to die, this is where the fun begins. When you are resistance capped, this is the stats in priority you should aim for when changing or upgrading your gear for your character. For defensive stats, you want life as the most important stat. You then want armor, block chains, strength as it provides HP as well, and lastly chaos resistance. Chaos resistance isn't too important, so don't spend a lot of currency to try to get that. It should just be considered as a nice additional bonus if you can afford it. And as a general advice for this build, I highly recommend that you try to get as much armor as possible on your shield. The shield is one of the absolutely most important pieces of gear you can invest into for this build, as we have skill nodes in the skill tree that directly increases the amount of additional armor and block chains we gain from our shield, and this is a substantial increase that we can get from this. Because of these skill nodes, the shield will become the major component of your defenses for this build. The offensive stats we want on our gear is pretty simple for this build. We basically want increased fire, spell, or elemental damage, and it doesn't matter which one, just get as much as possible. And secondly, we want increased cast speed. We don't care about critical hit chains or critical hit multipliers, since this is not a crit build. And now, since greater multiple projectiles require 119 strength at level 20, and we don't pick up a lot of dexterity through the skill tree, I will highly recommend you guys to either craft or buy gear with some added dexterity on it. You don't need more than 119 though in total. For this build, I would also recommend that you get 2 seething life flasks, 1 iron skin granite flask, a quicksilver flask, and either a ruby, topaz or sapphire flask depending on the content you're farming. Try to roll staunching on at least one of the flasks. Staunching basically removes bleeding effects, and I usually try to roll that on my seething life flasks as an extra affix. If you want to invest some more currency into this build, I will in my forum post link to a few uniques and specific items that goes really well with this build. It is, however, not something that we're going to discuss in this video. And lastly, for the bandit quests, you should help Oak on normal difficulty for the extra HP and kill them all on both cruel and merciless difficulty to receive the 2 additional skill points. And that's it, guys. Remember, if you have any questions, feel free to ask them below in the comments or by going to my forum post on the Path of Exile forums. I will make sure to answer any questions that haven't already been answered in this video. Thank you for watching, and bros, do you even know?